do it again. In this slight interlude, let me just say we will start at 2:30, so now would be a wonderful time to refill your wine glass. Okay.
What a fabulous, wonderful bunch of folks you are. I just love, first of all, I love Arbor Acres and the wonderful families that it creates here, allows to develop. It's just so wonderful to know that there are Arbor Acres families. We have all the Burkharts, we have the Peacocks, we have the Coltranes, we have the Leonards. All of them are Uncle John. And I have my PEO friends, church friends, and it's just wonderful to see everybody. And basically, Uncle John's friends. And that's what warms my heart the most, is to know that all of you were touched by Uncle John in some way. And I'm Ann Coltrane, I'm one of the nieces. There were 9 nieces and nephews, and there were 7 of us here. So it's and the next generation, great nieces and nephews. So he was beloved not only by Arbor Acres and Arbor Acres family, but by his own family. And it's just so special to have everybody here, and spouses and the whole bunch. Thank you all so much for coming.
Don't leave me. Don't leave me. Stay with me.
I love to have a man say, don't leave me, stay with me.
And I'm David Piner, and like you, I am one of Jon Burkhart's 10,000 best friends. Is this not John? Art Bloom and Victor Smith, thank you for setting the mood exactly as John would have wanted it. Now, as you know, John planned this meticulously, and in casting me as the master of ceremonies, he gave me absolutely no room to say much of anything, to just simply get out of his way, which I am about to do. Now, you're going to have about 40 minutes of listening to John, sharing his sweet company this last time, so enjoy it fully. Do feel free to get up. If you would like a glass of wine refilled, just raise your hand. Some of us will be watching for us. Let us keep you comfortable during this 40 minutes. Now, lastly, I promised Ann a limerick, but none of John's would do. So I'm not...
You know why?
Yeah, I am not going to give you once was a man from Racine. But if you'd like it, see me later. So instead, I have written one for him and for us. There once was a man from Maui who enjoyed showing us how he made each day a party, as with a full heart he pursued fun and laughter devoutly.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it is not easy finding rhyming words for Maui. Enjoy the next 40 minutes.
You're wondering why I've called you together. I hope that was good for a chuckle. You talk about some big egos, I got it. Well, anyway, I've invited my dear friend, Ellen Yarborough, Yar as we call her, to be with me today, and we are really close friends because we swim first thing every morning, 6:15 or so, Monday through Friday, and it's just a wonderful spiritual renewal as well as physical, and it's a great way to start the day. And we've done it for, I don't know, a couple of years, I guess.
At least.
A good bit of time. So here we are today. And rather than going back through all the stuff of my life, 2 things. I want to tell you some stuff that maybe I didn't have the nerve to tell you while I was here. What can you do, kill me?
Oh, let's see.
Anyway, I've asked her here, and we're just going to talk about, of course it's all about me. What do you think? And we're just going to talk about things that maybe she wants to ask me about, or we might get into some philosophy. We do that quite frequently in our swims early morning. Anyway, we're here. Ellen, it's all yours.
What was your name again?
Beats the hell out of me. I forget from time to time. Let's do it quick before I really forget.
Well, let's just say that the first question I want to ask you is, who are you? Who's Jon Burkhart? What's important to say in answer to that question?
I'm a person, I guess I got it mostly from my mother. I love to make people laugh. And she had the most wonderful sense of humor. And she would do anything. Well, she'd tell the same stories over and over just so she could laugh. That's where I got it. And I guess since I was a young child, I loved to make people laugh. But sometimes I would say things that were cute and I didn't even know it, and that's been a long time. I really work at it, as you might gather. Even a courtesy chuckle was appreciated by me in my lifetime. And to try to make a better life for everybody that I ever came in contact with. And I was so blessed to have known people that, for short periods of time, that made a profound difference in my life, and so blessed of the many things that happened to me throughout my lifetime. I never looked upon it as a great adversity. I think back about my childhood, having arthritis and all that stuff, and it was painful and all that. And I didn't grow up like other children, but it also made me the wreck I am today. I think the biggest problem that kids have today, they have so few challenges in their life. I was very fortunate being arthritic. I listened to the radio when I was 8. I was in bed for a little over a year, and I'd listen to the radio, and that became so much a part of my life. I knew I had to work in broadcasting. I didn't care what I did. I just had to work in broadcasting. And fortunately, I had that opportunity.
So you've had a life, in a sense, focused on sound.
Pictures, too. I can remember back to my first grade when we had flashcards and they were trying to teach us to read, how difficult it was for me to learn the word want, W-A-N-T. I can see that flashcard as though it were right here. And I really had a hard time with that word. Had they known what that word was when I was a kid, I really think I would have been termed a bit dyslexic, because still reading today is laborious for me. And certainly when television came along, it was very attractive to me because I was always interested in pictures. I just love to tell stories in pictures. And actually, I think I was attracted to broadcasting, majoring in broadcasting, because I thought if I didn't have to spell, I could do a lot better. Then thank God for today's word processors.
Well, let's see what I've learned about you so far. You didn't say that you really thought you would focus on getting rich or famous or successful, but you said you'd like to make life better for other people. And in addition, you didn't let me say that you were really focused on sound, because you broadened that out. There were things besides sound, the pictures, the flashcards, that made a difference to you, and when you had a problem with them, you still remember trying to overcome that, so you don't just quit with where you are. So that sounds like something interesting to know about you, that you'll broaden out what you might say you're stuck with, like being arthritic and being in bed for a year.
It was a challenge, and let's overcome it. Let's figure out what we can do with what limitations there are. I never thought of myself as a victim, but
if you had, you would have thought that was funny too.
I'd try to make something funny out of it, because that was just the way I was brought up, with my mother's wonderful sense of humor. So much of my humor is self-deprecating, and sometimes, well, too often, I will start jabbing at somebody. I only make fun of people that I love and really enjoy being around.
We share that.
Yeah. Sometimes it'll just be a knee-jerk reaction, and sometimes I do hurt people's feelings. But remember, if you do something like that, if you try to make fun of somebody, don't ever try to follow it up with, "I was only kidding," because it's too late if you really have offended them. Just forget it.
Well, speaking of being funny, and that was something you mentioned early, that you enjoyed being funny. You put some effort in being funny, and that's part of helping other people enjoy life. Do you sometimes think, well, I'm always seen as a funny person. Nobody knows I have any depth to me. Do you have any depth?
I've got to tell you a story about being people thinking about me being funny. There are people.
I saw you in a wig yesterday.
Some people in the world do think I'm funny, but I have this adorable great nephew. who I see about once a year or so. And he was, at the time, was about 4 or 5 years old, and the family was coming up to Corsicana, my hometown, to visit with me. I was there visiting for a few days. And he comes running by me and stops right in front of me and says, "They call you Funny Johnny. You're not funny." And then he just turns and runs off. That's my boy. And he does seem a bit precocious. Maybe I shouldn't tell his name. It's Jeb. Jon Burkhart, you little devil. I have no idea how old he'll be when I die, but and from the day he was born, he looked so much like me. Everybody in the family commented about it. That DNA is alive. Good old Jeb. Buddy, I hope you make something of yourself. Don't just fool around. Get some challenges in your life. And that goes for every person out there listening to what I say. It's so sad, those children that don't have challenges in their life.
I can't see anybody ever figuring that you didn't do anything to make something of yourself. That you weren't in any situation where you didn't put some effort into making what that situation should be.
And sometimes it was a struggle. Good Lord, the first time I sat down in front of a live microphone, I was terrified. And because I wanted to do it so badly, that was probably one of the most difficult lessons I had to learn. It was never going to be perfect. Remember, there's only one person that we know of that was on the face of the earth 2,000 years ago that was perfect, and they crucified him. So just keep that in mind if you think you're going to be perfect. It ain't ever going to be perfect. You take those cards which are dealt you, and you play them as they are, or as they say in golf, play it where it lies, and just make the best of whatever your situation is. That was the one thing I loved about Elizabeth, my wife. She never saw herself as a victim. She was the oldest of 13 children. Oh, I've got to start babbling. She was the oldest of 13 children, and a family of migratory workers. But she was determined that was not going to be her life. From the time she was 3 years old, she knew that. Oh, well, I'll try to get over my sniveling. But no promises.
She said, my goal is going to be high. I'm going to marry Jon Burkhart.
We went together for some length of time. And, well, she was singing on a variety show down in the Rio Grande Valley when I went to work down there. It was a station that the LBJ company had purchased, and I was directing some of those shows. And she had a gorgeous coloratura, mezzo-soprano voice, and loved to do show tunes and that sort of stuff. And she was a beautiful young woman. And by that time, I was 25 years old and kind of come to the conclusion I was concerned about having children with arthritis. I could not have stood the thought of having a child with arthritis. So I really was considering never having children and probably even not getting married because my work was 24/7. You never knew when you were going to have to work, and I just was not going to have a life like more normal 9-to-5 individuals. And Elizabeth, being around the television station, understood what it was and the way it worked, and fortunately agreed to marry me right before I moved away.
Did that stop you from moving away, or did she move with you?
Well, let's see. We had been dating 7 or 8 months, and I was really happy with the situation. I would work sometimes a week or 10 days and never call her because I was busy doing stuff, and she was going to school and doing all the stuff with her family and friends, and never, ever mentioned marriage. I was really happy with the situation the way it was. She was there, and when I called her, we would try to get together and have a good time together. But unbeknownst to me, an old boyfriend came through town and asked her to attend some event in the future, another month or two ahead of time. He was asking her, and she said, Yeah, I believe I will. Kind of giving up on our relationship, whether or not it was ever going to terminate in marriage. Well, time went by, and as it turned out, I was offered a job in the other end of Texas, Wichita Falls, and came back and to give my 2 weeks notice, and this is just the way it went. And I got together with Elizabeth and said, how do you feel about living in Wichita Falls? And this is exactly what she said. She thought for a moment, and she said, well, I don't think I could unless we were married. And then I said, okay. And we were married a week or 10 days later. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell anybody with whom I worked even, except one guy, Ed Cantrell, who was my best man. He was another director at the television station. But that was the beginning of our marriage, and we were separate even in the beginning. She had to stay in South Texas. She was in the middle of a semester at Pan American University, and I was moving to Wichita Falls, the other end of Texas, the upper end, and we were separated for that first several months while she was finishing the semester. And as I said, I had not told the family about anything about being married or even going with her. The first weekend she had available, 2 or 3 weeks after I moved up there, she got on the bus and came up, and I picked her up at the bus station late Friday night, and early Saturday morning there was a knock on the door. And she threw on a bathrobe and went to answer the door, and it was my Aunt Sadie, who I loved dearly, the most wonderful, gregarious person in the world. And she said, oh, I thought little Johnny Burkhart lived here. And Elizabeth says, well, yes, he does. And just then I stuck my head around the corner and said, Sadie, it's okay, come in, we're married. And she thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And indeed, a few weeks later when we had the opportunity and Elizabeth could come up again, we drove down to Corsicana. It had been a standing joke with me and my mother, speaking of jokes, from the time I first went away to college. She kept saying, well, when are you going to bring a little girl home? When are you going to bring a little girl home? I said, Mother, just chill out. I'm not bringing a little girl home. I'm too busy working on college and being my, and then of course after I got out of college, it grew even worse. She wanted to know when I'm going to bring a little girl home. I said, Mother, just look. One of these days I'm going to show up and I'm going to say, Mother, I'd like you to meet my wife. And she'd laugh. Oh, that's the funniest thing. Now, really, when are you going to bring a little girl home? A few weeks after Sadie visited, I called Mother and said, I want to bring a little friend home with me. Well, but she knew something was up because I had not been in Wichita Falls long enough to establish a relationship, much less bring a little girl home. So she pretty well knew. And she was very much on symbols in life. And she said, that morning when she was expecting us to drive up, she saw 2 little redbirds walking down the sidewalk, and she knew I was married. Oh, God. What a character she was.
A lot of heredity in both sides of your family that you've described to me sometimes, just sitting in the pool and hearing about some of your brothers and your father in construction and your mother's humor.
My father was a builder during the 30s of my childhood, and there wasn't any building during that deep depression time. My mother was this wonderful seamstress and probably actually brought in more money during that 10-year period than my father, because it was hard times for everybody and people wanted clothing altered in some way and passing it down. And so she had a land office business doing alterations. But it was a foregone conclusion that the children in our family were going to go to college. Listening to the radio as I did when I was 8 years old, I knew that's what I had to do for a living. The radio was a great source of entertainment, inspiration. I was a great fan of Norman Vincent Peale. The Power of Positive Thinking was a book he wrote. Great influence on my life. I was in bed a little over a year, August of 1941. And if you recall, in December of 1941 is when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So almost all of World War II is very vivid in my mind. I listened to the radio. I literally did listen to the radio 12 or 14 hours a day. And that shaped my life. And I went away to study broadcasting at the University of Texas in 1950 when I got out of high school. Never having been in a radio station in my life. But I knew it's what I had to do. And I never cared about the job that I did, whether it was sweeping out or filing records or any of that stuff, which I kind of did as an intern for a couple of years there at the LBJ station. They got ashamed of me hanging around and decided to hire me. When television came on, all the announcers were busy gravitating and doing a lot of live stuff on television, and I would fill in on weekend radio stuff.
Well, I want to interrupt you to get a couple of factual things here. One is, today, 2015, there may be younger people who will be watching you at whatever time this is projected, and don't even know who LBJ is. Just briefly, just say the whole name.
Oh, Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Okay, got something else. The other thing is, some people who may be around lucky enough to outlive you and see this knew your sister Dot Peacock. So say just a little bit about your family. You had brothers, and you had Dot. That's really all I know. But you mentioned the 13 children. Elizabeth was one of the oldest of 13.
Right.
Just a little bit about your family.
There were a total of 6 children in the family. Dot was the oldest, and my wife and I would stop off on trips to Europe. We were living on the island of Maui, and we found out what an extraordinary place Arbor Acres is, and that's how we wound up at Arbor Acres. She was 13 years older than I, and Mother had a very definite idea about the children of her family. She's going to have 4 kids. 2 of them were going to be dark-haired, brown-eyed, and 2 of them were going to be blonde and blue-eyed. How about that for an order?
Your mother was a planner as well as a joker.
Oh, she knew it. Well, it was no question about it. Dot was the oldest, firstborn. She was dark-haired, brown-eyed, and gorgeous. Oh man, the photographs we have of her when she was about 20, 21, they're just exquisite. A beautiful woman, inside and out. That's so true. And the next child was 13 months later was my older brother, who was blonde and blue-eyed, Harbert. The next child was Mary Jo, who was a little girl who was also blonde and blue-eyed. And then 2 years after she was born was Edgar Earl, who was dark-haired, brown-eyed. Mother's family was complete. The family, the picture we have of that group of the family, that was just as she had envisioned it. But the little girl had a new tea set, and she was out playing in the front yard. She was 3 years old, and Edgar Earl was 18 months. And she dipped up some contaminated water, and they both drank it. And they were both dead within a week of each other. Died of amoebic dysentery. And of course, the great heartbreak of it for the family. But my mother being who she was, and it was the beginning of the Depression, 1929. But she said, I've got to have 2 more children just to replace them. And so my brother, just older than I, was born in 1930, Kelly, and he weighed 13 pounds and 10 ounces. And the doctor said, you cannot have another child. It'll kill you. And Mother said, I don't care. I got to have 1 more just to hug.
You're not the first person in your family of great intent that does what you plan to do.
Oh, I never thought about it that way. But she had that family plan for sure.
Sounds like one thing to be said about your birth was that it was anticipated with joy, and you got a good start in being well loved as a baby, and things were going wonderfully. And then about 8, you went to bed for a year.
Well, I had been limping when I was 3, and it was kind of odd. In those days, it was just unthinkable that a child would have rheumatoid arthritis. And it sort of went away, but it reoccurred when I started walking home from school. I was in the first grade, and it was a little over a mile home, and I started limping. Even more pronounced was the limp. And finally, they took me to a specialist. You had to go to another town to find an orthopedic surgeon that really did the diagnosis, and indeed, I had rheumatoid arthritis.
Can you think of one or two things, either parts of your life or focus in your life or places you've been or things you've done, that you say, we shouldn't leave this out? There are a couple of things I really want to get mentioned. So what would that be?
Most of my career, I was a producer and director for the NBC affiliate in Houston. And I also worked as a technical director, and sometimes I'd go all the way around the world, almost many thousands of miles to do a television show. And it was really odd. When people would discover what I did for a living, the first question was, who do you know that's famous? Or say something funny, or something like that. Well, let me see. But when I'm with my peers, whenever we have the opportunity to get together and start renewing old remembrances, I can't wait for them to shut up so I can tell my story.
I recognize this.
Oh, but it's been a wonderful, wonderful life. How blessed I have been. Every day I get up and count my blessings just because I can stand up at the side of the bed. After that year, 3 months and 15 days of being in bed, taking that first step, you cannot imagine what a thrill it was. I would not change a day of it. It made me the wonderful soul that I am today. Or the total wreck that you're sitting there being put upon by my failed sense of humor.
Anything else that really needs to be said to get more of a picture of Jon? If we're painting a picture and we've used the orange and yellows and purples, is there some color we've left out?
No, but what was coming to my mind was during this time that I was in bed, my mother and the family went about their things. Nobody had to stay with me. In those days, it was say we never locked the doors. It was just a totally different world, and I really enjoyed solitude. I never got around to reading my text and stuff. My mother was the teacher, and the idea was that I would just keep up with my schoolwork. I couldn't have cared less. But I had this wonderful collection. It was called the Book of Knowledge. It was a large children's encyclopedia that was designed for preteens,
I had a friend who sold that.
Really? Well, it was a marvelous collection of information. I would sit there and thumb through that, look at the pictures, and read a few words. But
almost as good as the National Geographic.
You cannot, oh yeah. And we always had the National Geographic. There was a lumberyard that my father worked with, and they sent us a complimentary subscription every year. It was always at the house. And of course, that was the beginning of my great love of photography. There's just none better that appeared in the National Geographic. You just think about those things that enriched my life, even though we had so little money. But I got to tell you, the greatest lesson I learned about money and not having any. I was 3 years old, and I was following along, whining after my father as he was about to go to work. And I said, "Oh, Daddy, give me a nickel, give me a nickel." And he, kind of ignored it for a moment, and then he turned, and this was in the quiet stillness of my father, said, "I have a dime. It's really not enough to do me any good. You can have it." I never asked him for money after that. The family was able to pay my room and board while I was at the University of Texas. Room and board for the month was $55. This was back in 1950 to 54, and they paid that, and the other monies that I needed for books and the like was supplied by a scholarship for handicapped children. And it was a Will Rogers scholarship.
That's fitting.
Yeah, isn't it? It was a Will Rogers scholarship that paid $500 a semester, as I recall. And boy, that was a lot of money.
Was that tuition?
No. I had to pay my tuition, but the tuition was $25.
I mean, it really sounded like you were in the bed for a year and then everything was fine, but that's not true.
No,
You had
not at
physical
all.
things.
All through high school, it was extremely difficult to walk. And I took aspirin, phenacetin, and caffeine capsules, 8 a day, in order to tolerate the pain. And I was too stubborn to walk with crutches. I had to have a walking stick. And I used that and would hobble along, and that was the way I went through high school. But when I went away to the University of Texas, I hung that thing up in the garage. And my father bought me a used motor scooter, 3-wheel motor scooter, and that's what I got around on. I had had a problem, particularly in my right hip, for 20 years. The pain was excruciating. The arthritic thing, the joints wear down and rub on each other, and it's rather painful. But there had been no solution to the problem until in the late 60s, Charlie, an English doctor, invented the total hip replacement, and one was done on me. I was quite young for someone to take those hip replacements at that time. They weren't sure how long they were going to last, maybe 10 or 12 years, they thought at the time. I was 39 when that operation was done, and it lasted a little over 40 years. And then I had to have a revision done here in Winston-Salem.
That's just one leg then, one hip.
That's correct. The other one was done several years later. Every time an internal medicine guy looks at my records, he said, "You're lucky to be up walking around." And boy, it's true. Any day I can put my feet on the floor and stand up is a good day, and I feel so blessed.
You've gone through periods of great pain, but I don't remember ever walking down the hall and thinking, there's that gloomy John again.
I turn a little grayer.
We're used to that with everybody around.
Yeah, I'm in a natural setting now, aren't I? Oh, well.
Anything really important in the essence of Jon Burkhart that we've left out?
Oh, when I was in bed a lot and had time to think, I really began to develop my own philosophy, theology, if you excuse the expression. I was raised in the Methodist Church. It was a great source of inspiration to the entire family. In many difficult years, grand church, First Methodist Church, Corsicana. And that was the doctrine, which the only one I really ever knew throughout my childhood.
Which is very broad, most Methodists know.
Generally, except in those days, you didn't play cards and you didn't dance. It was almost...
Glad you kept away from that.
Yes, bad stuff.
Probably didn't cuss or spit either.
Oh, I learned to cuss. We lived just on the other side of the tracks, don't you see? It's where our house was. And so I had a considerable exposure to a large number of expletives by the time I was 13. And I had a problem with my left foot, so the doctors wanted to operate on it, kind of break loose some adhesions because of the arthritic setting of the foot was kind of crooked. And so they put me under with sodium pentothal, truth, whatever it is. Anyway, and I was out
the
like a
real
light.
meaning of damn.
Oh yeah, I was out like a light. But I woke up and my foot was in a cast and it hurt like the dickens. And I awoke to 4 or 5 nurses looking straight down at me and dying laughing. And they said, "We have heard sailors cuss and haven't heard all those words before." I was not happy with the way my ankle felt at that moment in time, and I wanted to share the pain with others.
So it's not that you don't recognize bad things. You recognize them, you deal with them, go on.
And I like to share the pain.
When necessary. Well, suppose this is the last minute of an interview, which it doesn't have to be. What will you say now?
But this is really weird. It may shock some people. But I had the whole concept, I think, about God is love. It's a very simple statement and so often used, and people say, "Oh yeah, well and good," and that's something we will strive for, is praying to God and trying to make our own life better or asking favors of God. My feeling was that within each individual, and even animals, lives that being, that thing that we call God, that sense of right and wrong, even as basic as the elements of which we're made, the positive and negative, neutrons, atoms, and the like. And we have these choices to do good things in life or to take the other road of destruction. And the things that are good in the world are godlike. That is God within each of us. I don't see it as some great bearded individual up there that we pray to. Prayer is wonderful. It's like meditation. It comes in many forms, many words, but it renews that soul within us, the reassurance, the warmth of the goodness that is within each of us. And we need to continue to look for it. That is God. And I think that is truth. And that's what Jesus was trying to tell all of us, or whatever your particular religious leader is it is the goodness, the truth in life that is the positive thing in all of us. And you can sure as hell kill it if you just put your mind to it. Even if you don't put your mind to it, don't kill it. Make the good in you shine.
You not only love, I believe in a God with which you can know you are loved.
Yeah. And being the baby of the family and the one that my mother had to have, just one more to hug, you cannot imagine how how I was nurtured in that infancy. And she would squeeze me so hard sometimes I'd start crying. She used to laugh. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She just had to hug me. Gosh, having those two children die, I cannot imagine a more difficult thing in anyone's life. To have their children die. The little girl was 3, the little boy was 18 months.
Oh, so young. But a lot of us have had either things that really signified to us so strongly, positive or negative, or just the bulk of the experience somehow sticks with us, that it's almost as if you were going to have a book with chapters describing your life in sequential segments to say, okay, here's the one word or the feel. Could you see your life in chapters? Could you do a quick run through of the chapters? I mean, you lived in Maui. That seemed to be very important to you. That was after your retirement, although you worked again. You're retired here. You're working again just because you're loving it and doing it.
I'll tell you about the first chapter. I would go to cowboy movies with my brother, who was about 8 years old at the time. I would have been 4 or 5. And he loved cowboy movies. And I thought they were the dullest things in the world, and I'd go upstairs and watch the projectionist. In those days, those 35 millimeter projectors were fed by an arc, 2 carbon arcs. That was a spark that was the illumination, dangerous as the Dickens celluloid film and all that stuff. But I loved being up there. It was just so interesting, a lot better than seeing Roy Rogers kiss his horse or Dale or somebody.
So this was pre-radio. I mean,
before my radio days. I always had this affinity for mechanical things. The year I was in bed, they were really simple locks on the doors of the house, and I went around and took out all the locks and made keys for them. But it was just simple. There were simple type locks, nothing to it. I don't remember a lot of the adversity of all that stuff. Of being the restriction. I didn't get out and play like regular kids. My legs really didn't develop like a normal child. I'm not terribly tall as a result of that, and it's a struggle to keep the muscles up. But because I always had that struggle, I'm far more driven to maintain what good muscle tone that I can, even at this stage of my life. And that's so important for everyone, to continue to maintain as good muscle tone and range of motion as you possibly can. Enough about that lecture.
So chapter 1 was watching the projectionist.
That watching projectionist. Chapter 2 was being in bed and listening to the radio and learning what I wanted to do for a living. I just felt so blessed because I did have that guidance in my life, and I couldn't wait to get out of high school to get to college to study about broadcasting. And I felt so sorry for kids that would go to school, to college and change major 5 or 6 times and graduate still rudderless ships and have no guidance in their life. The saddest thing in the world. I was so blessed to have that direction in my life. Then I married Elizabeth, or let's put it this way, she married me. I really didn't have that good an image of myself. I'm sorry, but I really saw myself as a poor little crippled boy sometimes in my relationships with women. I was very shy. I dated in college maybe 5 or 6 times. But I was so consumed with broadcasting and learning about it that I was not really highly driven to date, and I didn't have that much extra money to run around and have dates. I wasn't sure that there was any young woman that was going to marry me because I was a lifelong cripple, and who wants to have children with arthritis?
But you were dating this great singer with beauty.
Well, I didn't see myself as that attractive an individual. But my wife changed all that. She was a very quiet, self-assured individual, and it was just such a pleasure to be around her. We never argued. We would discuss things, and when we couldn't decide on a course of action, we would just table it until we could bring it up and discuss it again.
And then you lived in different towns quite a while, you told me.
We did. We lived in different cities. She got involved in politics. She was never really a big political person, but as it turned out, she worked in George H.W.'s campaign. He was President 41. Then when he became the vice presidential nominee, she went to work in the campaign with Reagan Bush and was appointed to a position in the government. She was vice chair of the National Credit Union Administration. They govern credit unions the way the Federal Reserve governs banks, and that's what she did. She supervised the changeover from 2 computers in the system. There were 55,000 employees in the entire United States in the Credit Union Administration.
So she managed that.
Yep.
It wouldn't be too hard to manage you.
And Vice President George H.W. Bush and President Reagan would have breakfast every morning. It was just a traditional thing. And one day he brought in a newspaper from Houston. The Houston Chronicle had done a story about Elizabeth, a sort of a Horatio Alger sort of thing, of the very humble beginnings in her life and growing up in a Hispanic neighborhood and her heritage. The president was quite taken with the article, and that, of course, that she supported President Reagan. And he said, I think I'll just call her. But let me preface this. Elizabeth had a couple of real close friends, one of whom was a guy that was an ex-CIA guy and a real character, and he was quite a practical joker. Well, anyway, the day came when the president was going to call Elizabeth, and her secretary came in and said to Elizabeth, the president's on the phone. And Elizabeth reached over thinking that he was Jim calling and doing some silliness, really picked up the phone and said, Jim, I haven't got time for this right now, and just hung up. And in a couple of minutes, the secretary came back in and said, I think it really is the president. And Elizabeth picked it up, and when she spoke to him, she recognized his voice, and he says it happens all the time. It was nothing new to him, but what he wanted to tell her was how much he appreciated her support and the job that she was doing there, and wanted to make sure, and there was about our commuting between Houston and Washington. I was continuing on as a producer-director in Houston at the NBC station, and his concern was that doing this commute, was it going to really be okay, or could he help find a job for me in Washington? Was that going to be helpful. And she said, no, we worked all that out. Well, word got around presidential personnel, the president had offered to get me a job, but that was the nonsense. That's the kind of guy he was. He was such a warm, personal individual. So often, and what little I knew about George H.W. Bush, Elizabeth, working with him closely, thought he had a great sense of humor, wonderful, brilliant guy, but somehow those things really don't translate to the medium. And people get images of famous people that are totally unwarranted. I never saw the great sense of humor of George H.W. Bush until after he was president. I saw him interviewed where he was a lot more relaxed and really quite a character. But Elizabeth thought very highly of him. And he had so many interesting experiences in government. He truly was driven. It was his obligation, he felt, service to the country. And he served many different capacities. Was very qualified.
So, in my mind, not knowing anymore, there's a gap between the commuting as a couple with the responsible jobs you did well in both places, and then later on sometime you retired and you were in Maui, so I don't really know much about in between.
We had first been there when she was going to speak to the state convention of federal credit unions, and we went around and visited every federal credit union in Hawaii and got to know a lot of different people and saw what a charming place it was and so beautiful, and we started making plans to live there someday. Well, a couple of years later, we went over and we were going to take a week and do a feasibility study about maybe living there someday. At the end of that time, we bought a house and we rented it out and all. The place I was working in Houston was owned by a very prestigious Texas family, and that time was coming to an end. It was evident they were going to sell it, and things were certainly going to change. The general manager was growing old, he's going to retire. And I thought, well, I really want to end this daily operation. It was very stressful what I did for over 30 years, but I loved directing live television, news, sports, and special events. But I wanted to leave while it was really still a good memory. And often after I retired, many people who worked there said, you left at just the right time. And I did. And that was the end of one chapter, and we opened another one when I moved to Maui. Also, leaving the television station allowed me to have the opportunity to go do some Olympic stuff, because I'd worked with so many of the NBC sports people with all the stuff in the Astrodome and around the area with our color mobile unit. I was able to go do some Olympic stuff, which was a lot of fun. But had I not left the television station at that time, I would not have been able to do that. So I did some Olympic stuff.
I probably should ask you about the honor you got. I know you've gotten lots of honors, lots of places, no doubt, but people have heard of things like it.
Oh, yeah. You can see it right now. I'll show it. It's up here in this trophy case.
Oh, was that the one going?
That's it. And that's a real Emmy. They're a lot bigger than you think they are. And that's the reason I kind of wanted to do the videotape here, our discussion with all the little mementos of our life together.
So that was an Emmy for an Olympic sport event that you.
It was for the '88 Olympics. It was all the techies got them, and it was the first time that live NBC color cameras had been intercut with the international color cameras. In those days, it was extremely difficult to cut back and forth. There were a lot of technical issues cutting from a piece of equipment to another. So it was the first time we'd ever had that tape capability, and it was a constant struggle to keep all that stuff synchronized so that they could cut back and forth and make it look like a whole bunch of different cameras. And so all the techies received Emmys for that event. I was so determined that I would get my name spelled right. My name is spelled Jon, middle name M-A-C, which I dropped a long time ago, B-U-R-K-H-A-R-T. They sent the information ahead of time, okay, you're going to be getting this Emmy, and here's the way it's going to be inscribed and all that stuff. And they had it spelled J-O-H-N. The Burkhart was correct. And so I made the correction on there and sent it back, and a couple of months later, I got the Emmy, and it was inscribed. They'd corrected the Jon, but they'd changed the Burkhart to Burkhardt. I just threw up my hands and said, well, it's never going to be. Even at the bank here in Winston-Salem, they want your middle name when you sign up. And of course, they had my name listed as Jon Mac Burkhart. But when I went in to cash a little check that somebody had given me for $15, they said, have you got an account here? I said, yes, I do. And so they started looking through their file and stuff, said, we don't have any Burkharts here. And I said, look under M for Mac Burkhart.
Yeah.
And, oh, yeah, we got one of those.
Suppose that there's one more little clip. It's going to be the very last thing.
I think I'd like to put up for my closing my picture when I was 6 months old. Usually, people have giggly, smiley pictures of their babies the first thing. This was the first time I was photographed by a professional photographer. And it's really interesting seeing those quiet, thoughtful little eyes. And that's the way I'd like to be remembered.
Silently?
As quiet and thoughtful, even though I made a lot of noise. Take time to think and enjoy life and inspire others, and you live a good life. I forgot to tell you how much I love you all. Every person who ever came into my life, how much I love you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. You made it possible. I hope to hell the equipment's still running. Be a bitch to recreate it. We can use that as It's those wonderful things that you leave the camera rolling. I wanted to do a thing with Gene Steelman. Because she was such an icon around this place. And so I asked David Piner if he would do it, and said, sure. So I sat up in his office, and we did a 30-minute interview with her, and it was just wonderful. It came across really well. But at the end, the camera was still rolling, and she was musing to herself. She said, well, I hope they don't put Miss Gene Steelman on my tombstone, because I didn't miss anything.
Great.
So, lovely company, was it not? Okay, what's about to happen is going to require everybody's goodwill and cooperation. We're going to share together a toast. And of course, for that you need champagne. The staff, the lovely staff, is going to pass among you, and we're going to ask those on the ends of the rows just to pass a glass down towards the middle until everybody has served. And while we are doing that, we are going to engage in song. The final hymn is on the back of your bulletin, and John said, sing with gusto. Oh, when the saints go marching in, oh, when the saints go marching in, we know that John will be in that number. When the saints go marching in,
Oh, when the sun isn't bright, oh, when the sun is shining bright, we know that John is skipping and dancing. When the sun is shining bright, oh, when the rain falling down. Oh, when the rain is falling down, we know that John has laughed till he's crying. When the rain is falling down, oh, when the stars pop in the sky, oh, when the stars pop in the sky, we know that John is gazing at Lisbeth. When the stars pop in the sky, oh, when we hear the thunder roar, oh, when we hear the thunder roar, we know that John is yelling instructions. When we hear the thunder roar, oh, when we laugh from deep within, oh, when we laugh from deep within, we know that John has said something funny. When we laugh from deep within, oh, when the saints go marching in, oh, when the saints go marching in, oh, we know that John is in that number. When the saints go marching in.
Do we need another chorus? How are we doing back there? We good? One more time.
Last one.
Pick up the first verse, then we'll. I'll call it. Okay, first verse.
Oh, when the saints
Go marching in. Oh, when the saints go marching in, we know that John will be in that number. When the saints go marching. Verse 4. When the stars pop in the sky. Oh, when the stars pop in the sky, we know that John is yelling instructions. When the stars pop in the sky. Oh, when we hear the thunder roar. Oh, when we hear the thunder roar. Oh, when we hear the thunder roar, we know that John is yelling instructions. When we hear the thunder roar. John's family, please stay standing. Those who are able to stand, please do so. John's family stands before you to share in this toast with you. Our time with John, like great champagne, sparkled. A fine Prosecco, John tickled our noses and had us giggle at his madcap antics. Old Fezziwig demonstrating to a world made poorer by Scrooges the riches of a happy heart. In our time with John, we saw one man's passion: bestow light to the world, carry sound to the ear, serve the common good, lift the heart, generate art, and wash the whole of life with happiness. So, let us drink, beloved of John, to sparkling days and happy ways, to laughter bawdy and limericks naughty, to a wicked grin flashed at Sophia Loren, to beauty and art from a gregarious heart, to characters we came to know living still on video, to love that walked with limping gait, strength and courage to demonstrate. Let us drink now, one and all, to John, who shall not die, but ever on us bestow a never ceasing sweet aloha. And now, Art Bloom and our Sharps and Flats will lead us in the benediction.
We're ready.
May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord, grant you love and peace. Amen. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord grant you love and peace.
Okay, laugh somebody. It's all right.
And I want one more thing. Aloha.
Aloha. Oh.